It is a very difficult process to even get to the point where you said, there's something going on here, there's something I need help with.
Host of the Growth Beyond Trauma podcast, Hannah McKimm.
When I was 16, I went out with friends and we went to a bar. It was like we shouldn't have kind of been there, and I met somebody when I was there and was sexually abused.
A leading voice in therapeutic coaching.
But, when you take into consideration that Northern Ireland is actually one of the most dangerous places for women to live in the whole of Europe.
You are listening to the Pecha Kucha podcast.
Okay, so Hannah, thank you so much for being here. I will start with the question we start every podcast off with, which is, what does success mean or look like for you as Hannah?
What does success mean to me? I think success for me has changed over the years. When I first started in my career as a camera assistant, which you weren't aware of before I talked to you about it the other day. I think for me it was I had to get to the top. I had to be I really wanted to be a cinematographer. That's what I wanted to do. Even when I was younger, I used to have pictures of all the big cinematographers and actresses and an Oscar pinned to my board, because that's what I want to do. That'll make me successful. When I was at school, they said that you had to be, it was like a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And I left and went traveling because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I think that didn't really fit their sense of success. But then for me, when I went to university then and went into the film career, it was yes, I have to get to the top. And then I realized that actually that wasn't fulfilling me. That wasn't what I wanted to do. People said to me this has to be what you want to do for the rest of your life, and I just it didn't satisfy me. I think I wanted to help other people. I knew that there was a burning desire inside me to help other people. Mm-hmm. And so now I suppose success kind of can change day to day. If I work with a client and they say, yeah, I get that now, or, oh my goodness, I believe what happened, to me between now and the last time we spoke. I've been able to do X, Y, and Z, in terms of their goals. I've been able to, walk more. It might seem really simple to somebody else, or I've been able to have that conversation I wanted to have. Then for me, that's success, because I've been able to help someone else. And then for me, in myself, some days, if I don't feel great, it could just be, well, I got up and I had a cup of coffee and I was able to relax, which for some people might sound strange, but to actually be able to switch off for me can be a success in that day. And then other days it could be, I got everything ticked off my list and, I'm heading out with someone tonight and, it feels great. So I think it changes day to day. It's not a very simple answer, but
Definitely not.
But I think it needs to be something that it means something to you, to sit down and reflect on, okay, today, what does success mean to me, rather than having it be this fixed thing that you work towards. Because I think if it's that fixed thing, then you can feel disappointed, oh, I didn't get to that, I didn't achieve that. But actually looking at, what did I achieve, I think is much more fulfilling and long-lasting than kind of having that one, fixed idea of where you want to go. So not very simple answer, and no. I think most of my answers won't be.
But knowing you a little bit the way I do, even though as before we were recording, we're saying there's another thing I didn't know that you've done or your experience, I'm not surprised, because you're very thoughtful in your approach. I just kind of wanted to, in terms of background, because you gave a little bit of an overview there, very quickly. But how has your personal experience with trauma and recovery influenced your approach to coaching and the creation of safe spaces for healing?
So yeah, it's interesting that you finished that with like safe spaces, because I think for me, through my experience, I didn't necessarily always feel like I had those safe spaces. So that's been definitely my focus now in my work, is how can I not only provide those spaces, but how can I support other people to provide those spaces as well? So whether that's like working with clients or working with businesses to support them to create their workplace to be safer, or their interactions with their clients to be safer, or other organizations. So I think definitely not having something can spur you towards creating that space. And so I suppose in terms of my experience and what that looks like when I was 16, I went out with friends, and we went to a bar. It was like we shouldn't have kind of been there, and I met somebody when I was there and was sexually abused after my experience of drink spiking. So they spiked my drink, and then that happened that evening. And I didn't really feel like I had anyone to really talk to about that. There's lots of kind of issues built in with that, in terms of having like a religious upbringing and not feeling like, feeling like I'd sinned, I think was a big part of that. And so when I did go and speak to someone, it also wasn't taken in the right way. There was nothing that was done with that information. So again, creating those spaces now, so that if people do disclose, that it is acted on in the right ways, and that people know how to deal with that. And then sort of, I guess for me, I didn't really understand what I was going through at the time. After it happened, there was a lot of like dissociation for me, a lot of that experience, kind of those feelings around that fear, that guilt, that shame, kind of all went inwards. And I was kind of dealing with that like on my own. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know. I didn't actually know what had happened to me was wrong, and that sounds really strange. I thought I was broken. I thought there was something wrong with me. So again, these are all the messages that, through my own kind of healing and my support, that I went through. So after I was in the film industry, I restudied and went into restudied. Not even sure that's the word. I went into art psychotherapy. So when I was growing up, a real sanctuary for me was my artwork. It was a place where I could get lost in, and I really wanted to kind of come back to that. And I found that art psychotherapy was something that combined the two. So it combined this art as a way of healing, but also kind of how people ticked and how people worked. Because I guess I kind of wanted to work that out for myself, but I also wanted to, I was always interested in how other people ticked. So bringing those two things together was really, I was really excited to kind of get into that and to go into that. But also as part of that, there was therapy that I went through as part of that work. And I kind of thought, I don't need this. Like, I'm fine. I just want to help other people. But I think it was that point where I realised that in order to help other people, I had to go to that place. I had to figure out what it was. I had to look at those experiences that I'd gone through and heal from that. A big part of my defense mechanisms was intellectualization. I wanted to kind of figure out why something had happened. I wanted to kind of go into the brain part, but actually working with art psychotherapy, and then after that doing brain spotting and other kind of somatic work that I have been doing recently, really helped me understand that like all of this was in the body, all of this trauma. And as I said before, the experiences that I had did all go inwards, and there was all that kind of internal like turmoil, really. And it was about kind of sitting with that and I think bringing compassion to that. And I think, again, that's another word that I would use quite a lot in my work, is that compassionate, like, acceptance and that compassionate awareness of, well, this is here and this is part of my experience, and, you know, and that's okay, because that has made me who I am today. Instead of pushing all that away and saying, oh, I wish that didn't happen, or, you know, I hate myself for responding in that way. I think I told you when we were kind of chatting earlier at the start, one of the big responses for anyone who's experienced sexual trauma is freeze. And the idea that you literally are completely still. And so when you look back, or if somebody else is looking at that situation, they might say, oh, why didn't you fight back, or why didn't you scream, or why didn't you do this? But actually your body goes into that automatic response of, I'm trying to protect you. So it's about kind of looking at those things, knowing them, yes, in the mind, but knowing it in the body and saying, actually, you know, you're not broken. Like, this is actually a normal response to an abnormal situation, an abnormal thing that's happened to you, a thing that you wouldn't obviously wish on anyone, but it's about saying, well, actually, how can I work with that? How can I work with the body? And so a lot of the work that I do now is very much about coming back into the body and saying, where is that? Where is that showing up? One of the things that I learned in my brain spotting is that you don't have to know what it is to know that it is. So you don't have to know what is there. You don't have to know the story. So I think a lot of the time people also, there's also a lot of my story that I don't think I really know and remember because of that dissociation that I had. But sometimes we don't have to know. We just know that the feeling is there, that sensation is in the body. So, you know, if we skip to the present moment, if we're getting anxious or worried about something, sometimes we kind of like stress ourselves out even more by like trying to figure out, well, what is it? Why am I feeling like this? Rather than saying, well, I am feeling like this. Okay, I'm just going to sit with it. I'm going to be with it. And actually then, even when I'm talking to you, whenever I started telling the story, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna say? I could feel my body kind of going into that automatic response. But as I've gone through, I've kind of sat with it and said, well, it's okay. You're just talking to JP. Like,
I can feel that.
Everything's fine.
Energy matching. I can feel it.
And I think to go back to your question is that I have to practice what I preach. Like, I need to go through. You know, this is like my life's work almost.
Yeah.
You know, is that it was really funny. I do you know on the websites, when you sign up for a website, it gives you suggested links.
Yeah.
And it said hannahmckim.guru is available. would you like to purchase it? And I put it up on my stories on Instagram when I said, oh, does everybody think I could be, you know, I should take this? And I swear it's one of the stories I've got the most engagement from, because everybody said yes, you should do it.
I think personal questions like that, and obviously the topic that you're, I don't want to say specialist in, but having lived experience in that trauma, and then now helping women with that trauma and similar types of situations that they and trauma that they've experienced. I think by stuff that you share really resonates. I mean, obviously I'm not a woman. I'm very lucky to have not experienced anything like what you or many other women have experienced, but it resonates with me seeing online you sharing. So even just something trivial like what should this be called, I think it resonates with people. Plus we all know that the algorithms like a wee bit of fun, don't they? And personal sort of.
I know sometimes I wonder, because the stuff that I share is a little, like, oh, it's a little bit too serious, or, you know, there's certain words that like it doesn't pick up and it doesn't share. And I think how are we meant to be talking about these really important issues? Like you say, you know, the statistics are like 97% of women have been sexually harassed in their lifetime. 1 in 4 will have been sexually abused. So it's like,
well, 97?
This is 97. And so when you think that's like sexual harassment, so that's a much wider perspective of, you know, on that scale of experience.
Yeah.
But most women have experienced something that has made them feel like disempowered, you know, in that sense of, just just
maybe
real
unsafe.
shame and unsafe and you know, even then the societal construct around that is saying, you know, oh well, it's just the way people are, you know, or boys will be boys, and like, you know, all those kind of statements that we use to really trivialize those experiences as well. Then that gets, like I say, when I was talking about my experience earlier, you know, that shame, that guilt gets internalized, and then that's, you know, then what do you do with that? And then so that's why, going back to your first question about safe spaces, it's important to provide that so you can say, well, actually, you're not alone with this experience. But social media doesn't really help with that a lot of the time.
Yeah, and funny, even earlier today we were having discussions about social media and the impact that it can have on rumours and how much traction these things get, and then it's almost like whoever posts first, that's the truth. It doesn't matter what they're saying. It's the same with the newspapers, been known for a while. Just kind of, because it's such an important topic, you know, sexual abuse is something that, as you said, you mentioned earlier, like shame, or am I right in saying you said you didn't actually know if something bad had happened?
I didn't even know it was like illegal. So when I'm saying that, I mean about, well, I suppose about the whole experience, but specifically like the drink spiking. You know, I didn't even at the time know that anything that had happened to me was somebody else's fault or somebody else's responsibility. It all was like on me, you know. It was like, oh, well, I've done something wrong. And I think that leads back to what I was saying about the societal construct around that of victim blaming. You know, it always, if you look at newspapers, a lot of the time it goes back to, well, what was the victim doing, you know. And they're not even maybe called victim.
It's almost shaming them in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
And you sort of one of the questions are that, you know, can you elaborate on the unique challenges? But you're already referencing some of them, and maybe there's more. But, you know, the unique challenges facing women who have experienced sexual abuse. But how do you tailor your coaching to support those women when they're in front of you?
So I think firstly, you know, the fact a lot of them know that I've experienced something as well, I think helps, because they know that I'm on that journey with them. I might just be that little bit more ahead of them. But I've gone through a lot of perhaps what they have gone through. You know, the definition of trauma isn't what's happened to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what's happened. So it's actually not necessarily the incident itself, it's the internal response that's going on.
That's really interesting, because I think I always, sorry to cut across you, I've always just assumed that, probably like most people, that trauma is the thing that happened, but you're saying that it's actually the thing that occurs within you as a result of an encounter.
Yeah, so it's one of the biggest influences on PTSD, so that's the longer impact of trauma after the event. Is a lack of connection. So it's not having somebody to talk to. It's not having that person to connect with. So again, going back to that idea of the safe spaces, if we provide those safe spaces at the start, or perhaps just after, and sometimes people aren't ready to talk about it just after. Again, it's about that reconnection to the body. So a lot of the time when somebody does have an experience like that, there's a disconnect. That's what I was talking about, the dissociation that I had. There's that disconnect from their body. So it's about how can you bring them back to themselves and reconnect them to their body, because a lot of the time they'll also feel that their body has done something wrong, you know, has betrayed them in some way. So it's rebuilding that relationship with themselves. And not necessarily, like say, making them tell the story. Because I think a lot of the time people come to me and they think, oh, I have to tell the story, or they think, well, I've come with this, but I've never actually talked to you about that, but I feel better. How does that work? And I've had one client call it black magic. Which I thought was quite funny, because I use this technique.
Should be a website name.
I also said that the box of chocolates, Black Magic, they could probably sponsor me. There are other chocolate brands available.
There's a plug.
But yeah, I think it's just that it tapping into the wisdom of their body and what's going on with them. It's not, it's not me. It's not me with that knowledge. Like I say, I used to think I had to know everything. I said I'd written notes for this and haven't actually looked at them at all.
That's a good thing.
That was my part of me, wanting to make sure I said everything right and did, but actually it's more about the experience. It's more about them, excuse me. It's more about the experience. It's more about them reconnecting to that inner wisdom that they have. And I always say that everybody has exactly what they need inside in order to heal. So in order to move forward, in order to have that growth beyond trauma, which is what I call my group and my podcast. So it's that idea of, yes, there is that experience, and it is a really horrible experience. You don't want to wish that on anyone, like I say, and nobody wants to have that experience. But I kind of visually draw it as if it's a black dot in the middle of a page, really horrible experience, but you can grow from that. So, I would get clients even just to draw around that. What do you want that to look like? The flowers and the colours, and actually it's about focusing on that. Is about how can you safely step into that. Yeah. People always talk about stepping outside of your comfort zone. Yeah. Which always kind of irks me a little bit when people say that, because actually you can't force yourself. You can't force yourself into that space of growth. You have to feel safe to step into that. So you have to take what I call small somatic steps into that growth. So it's the somatic is in your body. So your body needs to know that it's safe to step into that. So
it's almost like psychological safety is like from what you said there. It's almost like an umbrella term, because there's more to it than just saying like a throwaway comment. Let's make you feel psychologically safe. Yeah, you're allowing people in the moment to hopefully feel those steps. And would you be deliberate about saying, I'm now going to ask you to do this, or is that something that you're doing in the background in a session? Or
so yeah, I would be quite direct to saying, okay, well, we're going to do, I don't call it homework, I call it home play. Okay. So it's like, let's go and do some home play this week.
Paints a different picture, doesn't it?
And again, yeah, exactly. When I say that to you, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, it automatically, you hear homework and you're like, ugh. Yeah. Home play is different. It's something that you're going to be more open to when we talk about this comfort zone. And so it's really cool play with words.
And I think it helps them feel that there's more agency in their healing as well. That they have that part to play in that. So with a lot of people's trauma, it wasn't their choice. It wasn't something that they wanted to come into their life. There was, like I say, the automatic responses in their body came into play to help them survive. So, but now they have that agency. Now they can move into, well, what do I want that growth to look like? What do I want that next step to be? Where is it I want to go? And I think just even being open to that possibility that change can happen, I think is one of the biggest things to stepping into that.
Yeah, I can imagine that can be quite a powerful milestone for people to reach, that things can get better.
Yeah.
Do you find that's obviously everyone's different, but is that a particularly big milestone that people have to overcome when you're coaching them? Or do some people, do you find, know that already?
I think when people come to see me, there is a part of them that obviously wants to believe that they can find something different, or else they wouldn't be there. But I think it can be a big struggle, because for a lot of people that I work with, it's something they've lived with for a very long time. So in the papers recently, in the news recently, there's obviously been somebody that's come out to say that they've had an experience of sexual abuse in the past. And a lot of people might be saying, well, why is it taking them so long to come out and say that? And it's again what I was saying at the start of the conversation, that there's a lot of factors involved with people actually coming out and disclosing something. And it is a very difficult process to even get to the point where you said, there's something going on here, there's something I need help with. And I think, something's happened and I need that support to figure that out and to work through that. And it can be, and that phase then can be different for everyone. It might not be people coming out and talking publicly about what's happened to them. But it could just be that they then want to go and tell their partner. So many times that people are in a long-term relationship with someone and they've never even told that person because of that shame, that guilt. And Brené Brown always talks about if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs, 3 things to grow. Mm-hmm. So it needs secrecy, silence, and judgment. But if you douse it in compassion, then it can't grow. So
even that language of douse it in compassion, that's so transformative, isn't it? To view that metaphor you're using and then say actually you can replace it with a positive one.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like that secrecy, silence, and judgment. Like, where's that coming from? Yeah. And I think that as a society, we have that responsibility to remove those things so that people can come out and openly talk about, well, like, this is something that's happened to me, but it doesn't have to define who I am. I can move forward from that and move through that.
Given your background, because it's diverse, as we know.
Yes.
And we haven't even scratched the surface.
I told you that my answers aren't short. Apologies
it's great. It's really important. It's a really important message, as we all know. But given your diverse background, how do you perceive the role of media? And having a bit of experience with, which we were chatting before recording as well, and that I know of, with you being on the news and different outlets and stuff, how do you perceive the role of media and storytelling in general in promoting mental health awareness, and then obviously trauma recovery, which is what we're talking heavily about today?
Yeah. So... I'm trying to think of something concise to say.
This is on episode 2.
Episode 2, part 75. I think that the media have got a big part to play in a lot of things in terms of how we perceive, like you're saying, mental health, trauma. But also just, when I talk about sexual abuse, sexual trauma, and the fact that a lot of that comes from society's kind of stories and views that we kind of take in potentially unconsciously, there's lots of things in terms of how, relationships are seen. The what's that film with the guy with the jukebox on his shoulder and he comes to the window and what's that?
Give me more description.
What's that film called? The one he basically stalks her.
Okay.
Well, okay, let me start again. There's a lot of films that actually I think there's a lot of films that kind of dress like stalking, for example, up as something romantic.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of
like the Michael Jackson video, isn't
it? You go after the girl, and if she says no, then you keep going until she says yes, So there's all these kind of messages like that, or like if you look at kind of mainstream TV, Chris Tarrant and stuff used to like weigh the Spice Girls and things like that, when you're looking at body image. So there's all of these messages that we're unconsciously taking in, and because they're in films and on the mainstream media, we're kind of taking them in as, well, they're okay, that's how we do interact with people, that's all right.
Yeah.
That's how I should treat myself, that's how I should think about myself. So there's all of these kind of unconscious messages that we're kind of dealing with, and I think then when it comes to working with our mental health and trauma recovery, it's about kind of unpicking those as well. How we show up in the world is through our belief system, and if all of these things that we're taking in are feeding into that belief system, then it's also thinking about, as we're going through that recovery, what are we taking in? Being really conscious about that as well, and trying to kind of mediate that in a way that is healthy for us. You know, it's not like about looking at other people and what they're doing. It's about, well, what do I need? So going way back to like that, you know, question at the start when I was saying about success, you know, well, what is it I need for success? Well, before I came today, you know, it was like, I need to sit down and do some meditation. I'm not going to I've got some lengthy books that I listen to that are a bit mind-boggling. So I'm not going to sit and listen to one of those. You know, it's about, what do you need? What's your diet? What's that look like? And that's not just food. That can also be through the media. And I think, you know, working in the media as well. I've seen the other side of that.
Yeah. Hence why this question's particularly important as well, because, you know, it allows you to shed light on your experience from both sides of the wall.
Yeah.
But I think that the way that you highlighted the cultural things, for instance, these shows that most of the UK and Northern Ireland will watch, you know, people like Chris Tarrant, people like, you know, the things like you mentioned shame earlier. That's what came to mind when you were saying that. It's like we wonder where shame comes from, because if the Spice Girls in the 90s are being weighed by Chris Tarrant, as much as that's a gag, the message is obviously, and has been in many cases, I imagine, received that, well, I'm wrong for not accepting this treatment from other people.
I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough. You may know a little bit about our relationship, me, Sean, and Jason, who are doing the podcast, and you know that ChatGPT is something that we might talk about quite regularly. Me and you have talked about ChatGPT and like just separate to this. So it would go really amiss if we didn't bring ChatGPT into it somehow, right?
I'm excited
so
for this.
what Jason done, should I say, is he took all your information that is freely available to the world and put it in the ChatGPT, asked it to analyze it, and he asked it or prompted it to create a question. So I'm going to read off the question exactly the way ChatGPT has asked it. Okay. Hopefully it's not too challenging. So here we go. So the question from ChatGPT is: considering your rich background in both the creative arts and therapeutic coaching, how do you balance the artistic and scientific aspects of your work in trauma-enforced care?
Trauma-enforced care? I would never enforce my care onto anyone. ChatGPT.
There you go, ChatGPT. You're not being liked in this question.
It does pick some strange words sometimes.
It does. At least the word fostering isn't in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Household one.
Is this like an interview? Could you ask that again, please?
Yes.
Especially the end bit.
So how do you balance the artistic and scientific aspects of your work in trauma care or coaching?
So I love the science part of it, because I think once, you know, knowledge is power. I think when we understand what's going on in the body, then we can work with it. I don't like to say control either, but we can work with it. We can take away that shame and that guilt that, you know, we've been talking about, because it's not us. It's not a conscious choice that we've made to respond in this way. I always say that our brain doesn't have eyes, so it doesn't know where we are, you know, so when we experience something in the past, we respond in the best way we can to survive. Our bodies are amazing, like absolutely incredible. They will respond at, you know, click of a finger to do what it can to help us survive. But when we move into the future, to the now, when we're feeling safe, well, not necessarily feeling safe, when we are safe, but not necessarily feeling safe, our brains will still be responding in that same way. That switch hasn't been, you know, turned off as to, okay, we don't need to respond this way anymore. So I think it's amazing to know that. And then when I talk to clients about that, they're like, oh, okay, so that's why I'm doing this, or that's why I'm behaving that way. And that's why, you know, even though everybody else is saying that I'm okay and it should be fine, actually, I don't feel it. And then that removes that shame and that guilt.
Yeah.
And then when we remove that shame and that guilt, then we can start working with the body. Then we can start working with what is and what's there. And then when you're bringing in the artistic side of it, that's the art psychotherapy that I've been trained in. And I think any kind of embodied practice, because it's about bringing in that artisticry. I can't say that word. Artistic element to it. That's the dyslexia coming in.
That's it.
And it's, you know, what that client brings to it, their own interpretation of that, and what works for them. And when we start using that unconscious way of processing things, and we tap into that wisdom of the body, and not just that scientific, oh, here's how it works, and we bring those two things together, that's when the magic happens, the black magic maybe. And I think that's probably a really nice place to finish, is in terms of looking at how we would have maybe perhaps used to see the body. You know, it used to be mind and body.
Yeah.
But actually, when we think of Soma, which is the name of my new festival potentially that is going to be happening in the next few years, it's about that holistic view of who you are. It's not just the mind, let's work it out. It's not just the body, but it's how can we bring those two things together to bring that healing.
I love that. So I have one final question, and we're calling it the finisher.
Oof.
The finisher.
Okay.
The more I hear it, I actually think it sounds like something out of Mortal
Threatening.
Kombat or Tekken or something. Finisher.
KO.
So we're asking everybody this question, and it's wide enough. It's not related to what we just talked about,
super.
but you can make it related to that if you so choose. But the question is this, right? So thinking about the local business landscape, right? If you had the power to change or add one thing to the Northern Ireland budget tomorrow, haven't got the question out.
Just one thing?
What would it be and why?
What would I add to the budget?
Or change?
Or change? Is this like the genie question? You know, you can't wish
Blue
for,
sky
like,
thinking,
forever,
just
like all the money in the world. You know, I think there's so many things in Northern Ireland that could be addressed. I think Northern Ireland, from my perspective, is quite far behind the rest of the UK, because having lived in Wales, I can see kind of how they're progressing with things. And I do feel like we're kind of left behind a little bit in that sense. But, you know, when you take into consideration that Northern Ireland is actually one of the most dangerous places for women to live in the whole of Europe, I think that more funding needs to be put into not only safeguarding women in that way, but I don't think all the emphasis needs to be on that, because then that's the focus is on the victim again. But it's around, I think, education. You know, it's around that culture of, and what I was talking about, that responsibility of, it's all our responsibility to change this culture. Yeah. It's not just those people that have experienced it, who are or not going through their healing wherever they're at. I think it needs to be, a wider thing. So I do think in terms of budget and money, you know, education, I always say education. You know, once people are educated, once they are aware of these things, that these things are going on, but what they can do to change it, I think that's where we can start to then change other things. So
it's interesting, because there's starting to be a theme emerge from the answers coming from this, but all nuanced with the themes of the discussions. Hannah, thank you so much. I'm always blown away when we chat. I'm always really interested, and you always leave me thinking about stuff more deeply than I was before. Hopefully it hasn't been too nerve-wracking. I think we both eased into it there.
Yeah, after about the first 5 minutes. Like, okay, I'm all right.
But thank you so much for coming along.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for all you're doing. It's fantastic.